Today, I'm absolutely delighted to welcome Dirk Jonker, CEO and founder at Crunchr, to the Digital HR Leaders podcast. Dirk, welcome back to the Digital HR Leaders podcast. It's been over 4 years, incredibly, since you last appeared on the show, and a lot has happened since then. So maybe as well as providing introduction to you and your background and also to Crunchr, please could you let our listeners know how Crunchr has grown in the last 4 years too?
Yeah. Hey, David. Thanks to have me back. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. So maybe for those of you who don't know Crunchr, we're basically a very intuitive platform for workforce reporting, analytics planning. We're super passionate about the space because we are on a mission to empower HR to drive business conversations with confidence and clarity. And you're asking about what has changed over the last couple of years. To be honest, I don't even know where to start. Um, from a company point of view, the team has tripled. We're still headquartered in Amsterdam, but we now have offices in London, in Boston. I've moved to Boston. Many of the teammates from the first years are still with us. I'm super proud of the culture that we built, the product that we built, and together with our customers, it's a really powerful partnership too. Many customers are renewing for 3 years. If you look at the market, how that has changed, I think it's still discovering itself a bit. You probably remember that 3-4 years back, it was all about organizational network analysis. Today, people talk about skills. We're moving very quickly into Gen AI. And these are all very relevant, trending topics. But what matters for companies most depends really on their business context and the maturity, so where they are in their journey. And what I like about the conversations over the last 6 to 9 months is that companies are now less chasing the hype, being less focused on the bells and the whistles, but really focus on what matters to make an impact with the business, not in the year, but tomorrow. So probably also due to the work that you do, HR leaders are taking a pause and reflect on where they want to go and build a plan from there. So lots have happened.
Brilliant. And actually, I love the thing you pulled out there around, how people analytics empowers HR professionals to have business conversations. I think it's certainly something, it's a theme that's going to flow through, I think, our conversation, how people analytics really drives business outcomes and outcomes for employees as well, but business outcomes. And to that point, Dirk, in January, a few months ago, you wrote an insightful article, which I was delighted to include in my monthly data-driven HR monthly LinkedIn newsletter. That's a bit of a mouthful, isn't it? Your article discussed the driving forces that you think will propel HR forward in 2024, but also beyond. And those included business transformation, partnering with finance, upskilling HR in data literacy, ethical AI, ESG, and the skills-based organization. And we're going to touch on all of those in our conversation.
Cool.
We're halfway through the year, or more or less halfway through the year. So I'd love to know from your perspective how these trends are mapping out so far in your work with global organizations and what you're seeing. So let's start with business transformation. Are you seeing any movement with HR playing a more active role and even leading business transformation in some organizations?
Yeah. I think business transformations are very long-term strategic programs. So I'm not sure how much change we can already see in just 5 months. But we do see, again, a shift in these transformations in the conversations that we have. So the conversations are less focused on technology and more on strategic business alignment. This is a really big thing. It's, I believe, often driven by board discussions on future of work. These boards are really interested to understand what the impact will be of the accelerated process automation on the blue-collar workers, but also the impact of the ChatGPTs and alike on the white-collar jobs. So then the immediate next question, which moves into HR, is what is the impact on the workforce, how to fund this transition. Business transformations are incredibly expensive. So how can we save cost here to reinvest in growth there? And then also, as a third, how do we track the critical numbers and our goals to measure that this transformation is on track? So those conversations are happening, and those, to me, are leading indicators that HR is getting more deeply involved in business transformations.
Yeah, and all of those 3 steps that you talked about, they all require data to inform the transformation, but also data to inform how you're tracking against
Exactly.
it. And maybe the rise of, maybe talk to a little bit about how the rise of people analytics, or the continued rise of people analytics, is helping HR have that more active role in business transformation.
Exactly. So people analytics is a beautiful methodology to really show where the risks and the opportunities are related to your goals, so you really know where to focus. It helps to create a 360 view of the problem, to have better business conversations. But then again, the most important part is that you not only talk about it and agree, but also set your critical metrics and track against these goals. And those conversations are happening more and more, where the technical details around, how do we integrate with Workday? What are the API connections? I mean, of course, all of that stuff is really important. It's, very needed to play, but it's very distant from the board discussions that are happening. And HR is feeling that pressure and starts to make fantastic contributions.
And in terms of tracking progress against business transformation, I mean, we don't have to go into all of them, but what are some of the metrics that companies would typically be looking at from a kind of people perspective?
This really depends on the type of transformation. So let's maybe take cost as a very good example, because the funding of any transformation is incredibly important. Typically, you would look at your spans, your layers, your managerial density, your SG&A ratios. So basically, how much HR do I have relative to the size of my organization? How much finance do I have relative to the cost and to the revenue that I have? Those are very easy metrics to track. And then it comes to setting your goals. And then you need some kind of mechanism basically to report on it monthly. So I think those are some of the things that you can very easily track, but I think we will get into that later on. Yeah.
So middle managers, there's a lot of focus on middle managers at the moment. We've seen research from McKinsey and others talking about the role of middle managers and how that's changed and evolved over the years, particularly things like hybrid work, technology, more distributed teams, etc. How can we empower them? How can we empower middle managers to be the catalyst through this transformation?
It's really important that you bring this up, because people analytics and all kinds of strategy will help us to, create a path towards transformation. But we also need to execute, and this is where the middle managers come in. These middle managers are incredibly important in supporting the programs to drive the change and lead by example, really. It's not about just communicate, this is what we're going to do, but it's about creating a belief. I don't know if you saw the series Ted Lasso, but it's all about that, that is really needed to drive change. So let me give you a really simple example in my own company. Part of the work of our product engineering team is writing tests. So you write code that produce features, and then you need to test if it works. It's very important, but also not the most exciting work, but it's an excellent candidate for automation. And driving change is not saying from now on we're going to use AI to write the tests, but it's really to explain how this would free up time so we can work on more interesting stuff like the AI assistant that brings us much closer to our vision, and therefore the value to our customers. So how we now think of middle management is changing a bit. I mean, in the old days, we were all thinking about delayering, which basically means cutting out the layers of management. McKinsey also was big on that 5 years back, but they realized that driving change happens through this layer. And this new approach is, I believe, a better one, but it also requires HR to think it through. So, for example, can we enrich our Workday data, to use a metaphor, with Qualtrics data or Glint or Peakon or whatever, to basically build this transformation monitor? And can we use generic driver analysis to explain not just the standard use case and turnover, but can we explain using driver analysis the acceleration and the adoption of our transformation program on, for example, what makes a manager a good manager? And to conclude, we now talk about middle managers. I think that in the next podcast that we record, we're going to discuss the role of the frontline employees. in building, brand awareness, financial performance of companies. So it's probably next.
Yeah, and it's interesting actually. I was at the Wharton People Analytics conference a couple of months ago, and the person responsible for people analytics and some other areas at Walmart was speaking, and they were talking about how they enable their frontline store managers. So it's a
There
little
you
bit to
go.
what you were talking about
Yeah,
there. So obviously there are some business metrics that they're pushing to the front line in terms of products that are going, products that need to be replenished, profitability of the store, revenue of the store. But they also talked about some of the people metrics that they are pushing on an ongoing basis. And there's 5 or 6 key metrics that they're pushing to the store managers so they can make decisions in the flow of work. And that's really what you're talking about there, isn't it? It's getting the information out to managers, both so they can make decisions, but also they get insights on what makes them a better manager, perhaps as well.
exactly. So I believe,
For
yeah,
example, I don't know, you've got a new person in your team, and there's enough studies out there that tell us the importance of that regular contact with your manager when you're onboarding into a new organization. So nudges going to or information going to the manager to kind of proactively drive those conversations can be really, really helpful, and ultimately help the new employee, help the manager, but also help the organization as well. And I guess that's where data plays an important role.
absolutely. And that is, for example, the reason why in people analytics, if you're building product, you have to have a very open mind and build stuff very generically. So driver analysis has been out there for a long time. What is actually driving, for example, turnover. But the moment that you generalize this, then you can, for example, use driver analysis on, frontline sales at Walmart in this case, and then basically see what is driving it if we feed not only standard financial data or team composition or deltas between you and your manager, but also the results on your engagement surveys, on your absenteeism stats. And that is really when a whole world is opening. And that is exactly what we see now with our customers. And that's why I'm a bit positive again on people analytics.
The next one I'd like to cover, and I guess it's kind of linked to that, it's definitely linked to driving business outcomes with people analytics, and interested to hear your thoughts on this because we've talked about this before as well, about partnering with finance to improve cost margins.
Yeah.
We know how important it is to demonstrate the commercial value of HR initiatives to sometimes gain board buy-in. Our research at Insight 222 interestingly found that only 24% of the 271 companies that participated in our people analytics trends research in 2023 had built relationships with finance. I'd love to hear your take on this, and maybe some of the research that maybe or the examples you've got about where people analytics partners effectively with finance.
Yeah, I think let's do some root cause analysis first. I really believe that finance and HR, they sit on completely different islands, and on every island they speak a different language. So on the island of finance, they talk about unit economics, critical numbers, OPEX management, margins, revenue growth, productivity, efficiency programs. And on the island of HR, we talk about people, organization, leadership, engagement, culture, skills. And both islands do really important work. And at first, it feels a bit like a parallel universe. But what we see very successful companies do is to build linkages and to start to speak each other's language. So, for example, why don't we start agreeing by redefining the headcount and FTE definition? Why don't we in HR start to add cost centers and profit centers to our analysis? Why don't we help to quantify HR practices, for example, absenteeism, first year turnover, having too many layers, and translate that into unit economics, into margins, etc. So that is important. One feature, let me give you an example, that really helped our clients big time was to show the headcount walk on cost. So everyone knows the waterfall charts, and we all do this with headcount. Some companies do this with FTE, but you can actually do this on anything. So again, we generalize this, and now we can do this on fully loaded labor cost. And why is this important? Imagine that you are working for a company where in certain cost centers, there are budgets to reduce the fully loaded labor cost. Finance is basically getting their bookings on the ledgers from payroll, but they just see the end of month balance. So let's say finance observes an increase in cost center 4 to 3, goes to HR and says like, listen, dudes, we agreed that we were going to reduce fully loaded labor cost, but it increased. HR says, what do you mean you increased cost in center 4 to 3? We didn't hire anyone. And now with the headcount walk on cost, you immediately see that they're both right. They did not hire extra people, but they moved people internally into a cost center. And also some other people increased their hours, which increases cost. So we need to build these bridges. Another thing that I would say is that we often talk about finance as they figured everything out. I think they are advanced, but they definitely didn't figure everything out yet. What they did really well is they started to speak business language. So years back, they talked about cost centers and ledgers, and now they talk about margins and revenue. And this helped them to grow from a accounting role into what we now call finance, and from the most boring job in the world to the number 2 position in every single company. This is the path that I wish HR is going to.
Yeah, we've got to get away from our HR language and nuances and as you said, got it into the language of the business. And actually, if we want to build the relationship with finance as a profession, then that's what we need to do. Now, that kind of lends it quite nicely to the next topic, quite an adjacent topic around building data literacy in HR. Again, if we look at the research that we've done at Insight 222, we still see a gap between the expectation of the CHRO and the reality on the ground. So last year in the People Analytics Trends research, 88% of CHROs and those participating 271 companies say they regard people analytics as an essential part of the HR strategy, but only 55% of those companies say they've got a data-driven culture in HR. Now, the good news, that went up from 42% in 2021 and 49% in 2023. So we are getting there as a profession, albeit slowly. As a CEO of a successful people analytics technology firm, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this topic and how do we build that muscle, that data literacy muscle in HR?
We have been very interested in this topic since 2018. And for already 6 years, we've been partnering with Professor Boon and her team at the University of Amsterdam to really understand the drivers and the blockers of people analytics adoption. And we were really inspired, David, by other professions, how they started to adopt data in their day-to-day work. Think about Formula One, think about physicians, think about other sports, soccer, for example, or football, I have to say now. So what we found is that there is a very clear flow for building a data culture in HR. It starts with inspiration and simplicity. And this leads to a feeling like, wow, this could be super powerful. And I feel I can do this. This leads to a feeling. So then we need to talk about how to transform this feeling into an intention. And this comes along with capability building, seeing the personal potential of like, hey, if I master something like people analytics, it advances my personal career. And also a subjective norm is really important. It's a CHRO that says, we are going to make incredibly important and complex decisions, bring data to the table to make sure that we make the right ones. And only afterwards, after you've set the groundwork, then the external stimuli lead small pilots. And then, with governance, you scale from experiments to adoption. So there's a very clear flow. And we actually used people analytics to understand the adoption of people analytics. And what we found with a lot of data analytics experiments that we run on data is that just having inspiration very, very loosely connects to organizational-wide adoption of building the culture. So just talking about it is not going to cut it. Correlation of 0.2. Just a super simple solution by itself also correlates incredibly low. But the combination of inspiration and a simple solution increases the powers by 2.4x. These are the multipliers. And maybe some learnings for the listeners that I can share that you can use tomorrow. The first is that a successful adoption, again, is not determined by how advanced your solution is, but how easy it is perceived by the majority of HR and business users. It is not about catering to the exceptions of the highly skilled people analytics teams, that like to sometimes manage the exceptions, but get over it and think about how a solution empowers HR business partners right in the conversation with the business. That's the first thing. And the second thing, and we talked about this before, David, it's that I wish more people analytics teams could think like a startup. Why? Because this is really still a developing field, where basically you develop product for a moving target. So imagine that you and I, David, are going to step out of people analytics and we're going to build a hotel. We're going to open a super cool hotel in the center of London. Of course, the hotel has a pool and the temperature of the water is important. But do we really need equipment from day one that measures it down to the fourth decimal place on how the temperature is? And do we need to spend tons of time on policies on how to adjust the temperature for seasonal adjustments? Maybe down the line. But for now, the guests just want a pleasant swim. And similarly, in people analytics, it's super tempting to get bogged down in perfecting every single detail. But if you have a very technical or too much enterprise-led approach, you will end up in a super complex, expensive environment that no one really uses. You need a big team to manage. And at the end of the day, people are confused and you're not realizing your goals. So think about opening a hotel. We need a pool, needs to be pleasant, and later we will refine.
And that makes a lot of sense. This is a topic we've been researching as well, and actually, I think it dovetails nicely with your inspiration piece. We found that the importance of role modeling by the CHRO and the HR leadership team is so important. So it's not just a case of saying that we're going to be data driven. It's their role modeling themselves. We've even upskilled HR leadership teams themselves to help them to do that, because it kind of then spreads. If you're an HR professional, you see your HR leadership team being data driven, using analytics in their conversations, then you're going to be more. You're going to think that you need to do that as well if you want to progress within the organization. Sometimes I think we need to make it about the HR professional themselves, and yes, as you said, make it simple for them so they can use it in their day-to-day work, and they see the success and they see that helps them. HR business partner, for example, helps them have better conversations with the business, but also helps them develop as people as well, and helps them get access to opportunities in the organization that they would not otherwise have access to. Because if you make it about
Absolutely.
people and about them, then they're more likely to do it, aren't they? So it's human.
Exactly. This all falls into the bucket. It creates an intent to use, and this is actually 0.7 correlated to actual opportunities to use with external stimuli. So it totally makes sense, and it was actually quite cool to use people analytics to understand the blockers and the accelerators. We used it in another company too, where the HR leader in our maturity model, it's a 4-box model, and the most difficult is to go from box 2 to box 3, which is basically we are on top of the reporting, but we struggle to move into opportunistic analytics, which basically means we push a lot of stuff, but the business is never really coming to us for any questions. And there, the biggest blocker was the change fatigue in the HR teams to really adopt people analytics. They said, we believe in it and we understand it's important for our career. And we hear the CHRO saying how important it is and role modeling. But listen, 3 months ago, it was all about this new Workday implementation. 2 months ago, it was all about data cleaning. Last month, it was all about the restructuring. And now we have another thing called people and analytics? Come on, give us a break. We need headspace. So it requires a bit of tech and touch to make this work. Yeah. It requires a bit of tech and touch to make this work. Yeah.
Agree with that. Well, and I think one of the things that we see, again, maybe you talked about sometimes the people analytics teams themselves maybe want to do very sophisticated, more advanced analytics. You talked about O&A at the start, and I still remember people would come and say, I want to do O&A, and it's like, what for? What's the business problem you're trying to solve? We've got to connect what we're doing to actually real business problems that we can solve, because then we'll get buy-in of not just the business but from our HR colleagues as well. And that probably leads next to the next topic, which
Exactly.
is the thing that's on everyone's lips at the moment: artificial intelligence, generative AI.
Oh, there we go. We have the bingo card full.
We got there. We got to we've managed to go 25 minutes before we talked about it in detail. So AI will undoubtedly help, and is already helping HR and people analytics derive insights faster and support and will support the function as they become more strategic in their business partnering, and we're seeing that already. Nevertheless, as you rightly mentioned in your article, and I know we've spoken about in the past, if not implemented ethically, it can have some serious repercussions on the business. I mean, from your view, and again, as obviously I know Crunchr has got a generative AI interface now as part of it as well. How can HR professionals ensure that they are implementing ethical AI, and what should they look out for when purchasing AI tools? And because it's a very confusing marketplace, I think, for buyers.
It is. It is. I have a couple of thoughts on this. So first, I use personally ChatGPT in everything I do. You know, we have a private account, so nothing is shared, and we have all kinds of policies internally, what you can use and what you cannot use. I incredibly believe in the power, and I can really see how this will impact your work, my work, the work of my colleagues and customers. But we have to realize that generative AI, and especially solutions around this, are still very much in their infancy. The technology is brand new, and it needs at least another 12 to 18 months more to become production ready. One of the things, for example, and I talked about this at People Analytics World, is that the more instructions you put in place, the more personalization, the longer it waits. Many companies are now adopting a multi-agent model where basically all small AI agents, let's call it that, are communicating with each other to get a very transparent flow. Well, this is all fantastic, but you as a user do not want to wait 35 seconds for your answer. So the technology is moving fast, but it needs at least another 12 to 18 months. And what we also need to realize is that all these systems are going to be an extension of our brand. So we really do not want to rush this. So there was a very famous philosopher. His name is Eminem, and he said, "You got one shot, one opportunity." And if generative AI is really an extension of your brand, it must follow your values and your ethics. So one of the things that we really are building is a constitution. And this is a really cool topic or subject. You can basically write down your values, write down what you find important, how you want AI to behave. You can include some fantastic starting points from the United Nations, for example, on non-discriminatory. And we can now load this into our model. So we can give it also a face and behavior. On the other hand, I find it really interesting to think about the impact that generative AI also has on the work of HR. So for a long time, I was not entirely convinced, to be quite honest, that we should provide all kinds of data training to HR professionals. Of course, an introduction course is fine, but many people in HR, they loved English and history at school and did not choose math and science. And I can see a world where generative AI is helping HR to ask the right questions, to guide them through a consulting cycle. And that is exactly the approach that we're taking in Crunchr. So what do we need from HR in the future then? It's not about the transactional blah, blah, blah. I mean, people can now use self-service to fill out forms or whatever. Is it analytics? I don't know. Product technology, will do a lot, from servicing problems to providing the full picture of what's happening. What we need to double down on, I believe, is how to translate these outcomes and drive actual change. So basically, the HR as the people and culture consultant to the business. And I believe Erin Gerbeck of Cardinal Health is going to talk also about this. This is really what I see ahead for a lot of people and people names. Just like doctors or Formula One racers do not know how machine learning works, but they have embedded the output in their daily flow of work.
Yeah, we talked quite a lot about productization and democratization in our episode 4 years ago. And, maybe one of the things that
Yeah.
I'm seeing that we're seeing at Insight 222 is that generative AI can democratize analytics even further, because as you said, it means that we've got to strike a balance, obviously, of people not necessarily having to be experts in data and analytics themselves to be able to use these tools, because that layer kind of does it.
Hmm.
But we've also got to be careful, I guess, from the ethical point of view, that people don't make the wrong interpretation when they haven't got the training to go and make decisions on it. So that's that. I guess that's the grey area. And as you said, you know, 12 to 18 months really to be production ready,
Exactly.
perhaps. Maybe maybe it's training in ethics that people need, and what to look out for, what to maybe ask your people analytics team before you go and make a big decision. I don't know, maybe it's a slight nuance to what we've been thinking about before.
Yeah. I mean, the decision making, yes. For that, you want to consult. But do we have ethical guidelines for how to use Google? Not really, right? Is there a human in the middle? Very popular term nowadays. Listen, this is so perpendicular to the whole idea of productizing technology. There's no man in the middle for Google. What you want is that if you ask Google a very offensive question, that Google says like, "Listen, David, I'm not going to get involved in this. It's
Mm.
not ethical." But this is where the Constitution helps. So I think we need another, year before the technology is fast enough, generalized enough. The approach that we're taking is that, we're going to launch it out of beta in 2 months. The first version of the AI assistant will go across all the data that we have in Crunchr, so from financial to business to HR data. You can ask any question that you have. But as you move to more automated decision making, we have to be super, super careful. It's a violation of GDPR. It's a violation of the EU AI Act. There you want the man in the middle. But for the first part, let's make it as simple as possible, and also use voice basically to have conversations.
Yeah, it's exciting to see where it's going to develop, I think, and as you said, it's only in its infancy. So 12 to 18 months, I'm sure
True.
there's going to be a lot of progress. Yeah, it's going to be
Yeah.
really interesting.
Do you know what you know what I hope? I hope that in 12 to 18 months we do not talk about AI anymore, because it's so embedded in everything that we do. That's one of the reasons that we didn't give our AI assistant a name, for example, or that we don't charge separately for it, because it is part of the core offering, and it has to become second nature to HR. I think many of the interfaces of all kinds of products are going to flip into like either a Google search bar to interface with your background, or it's going to be headless, which means that your AI agent is going to work with other AI agents from other products to come up with a super, connected answer.
Yeah, and I also I'm an optimist. I'm a Liverpool fan, so I have to be. But
I'm Ajax, so we're in the same boat.
Ajax, sorry, it's not been such a good season for you, has it? But a great history, just like Liverpool. But I'm an optimist, and I think if anything, the acceleration of generative AI is going to actually help people analytics itself accelerate. I think it's been
Absolutely.
growing steadily, but you can just see
Absolutely.
even more coming on that. So
It's an
um,
incredibly exciting future. I agree.
it is. It is. So let's move to something again quite nicely tangential. You mentioned EU legislation around AI.
Mm.
In the article that I referred to at the start, you and I think we talked about this as well. You talk about driving impactful and compliant environmental, social, and governance, or ESG as we all know it, tactics. How does the new EU Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive impact HR from your perspective?
This is the only topic that really deeply worries me. We are not making progress fast enough on ESG reporting. The due date is coming up very quick, and I really want to be clear with everyone on the call. Almost all European companies with over 500 employees or more have to produce their first CSD reports in 7 months, which basically means you have to report on all the data that you had already been collecting since January this year. This is happening in 7 months. In 8 months, you're going to work with your corporate auditors to validate your conclusions. So do you think a corporate auditor is going to, certify basically a whole balance sheet in Excel or in Power BI? Come on, forget it. If you're saying that your accountant is going to build your ESG report, you need to find a second independent auditor who's going to audit your accountant. So it's going to be, double cost. In 9 months from now, you are going to be working with your executive board to craft a narrative and practice their Q&A for their Capital Markets Day or their annual shareholder meetings. And right now, you may, for example, think that, adequate wage, it's a lot of work. We deem it, immaterial. Well, I cannot wait for your CEO to come to you and say, like, listen, at our Capital Markets Days, we got so many questions on why we thought it was immaterial. Are we trying to hide something? Do we don't think it's important? So we have to realize this. On the other hand, HR leaders that are listening to this podcast realize that ESG reporting can be a tremendous catalyst for your workforce reporting and people analytics strategy and your foundation. I mean, new legislation always gives tailwind, creates budgets that you never thought were possible before. Budgets probably out of finance and not out of IT. And we're really sharing as much information as possible to help HR. We did a great session together, David, in January for your network. We did a podcast with Ian Pinkett of Arcadis in April. We developed a ready-to-go CSRD reporting template that you can just download, and you will hear a lot more from us. But this is the only topic that gives me a bit of heartburn because it's not going fast enough. And in 9 months' time, you wish you had started before.
And just to kind of crystallize, I think, am I right in saying that with the CSRD, each company, as you said, with more than 500 employees in Europe, and that includes American and British companies who happen to have 500 employees in the EU as well, doesn't it, as far as I'm aware?
This has changed a bit since the last time we spoke.
Okay.
But generally speaking, if you are a European headquartered company with over 500 people, then you can bet that you're in scope.
And it's like, again, it's quite a lot of metrics. It's over 30 metrics, I think, that companies are going to have to publicly disclose, isn't it? Isn't that right?
Yeah, and with that, there is 162 pages of guiding principles that you have to go through, and that the auditors will go through. So we cannot get away anymore with like, oh yeah, our headcount was more or less this, or oh yeah, we changed the headcount definition in April, and therefore the headcount is just slightly off, but is directionally correct. Well, welcome to the world of auditors and finance. Maybe in the first year they give you some slack, but every year after they're going to make annotations to your report, and this is where you're going to get a very angry CFO.
And this is a trend, isn't it? I mean, we're seeing, and it's partly because investors are demanding it, I guess, but also regulators are demanding it, that companies are having to disclose more detail about their human capital.
And consumers.
And it's an opportunity. As you said, it's an opportunity for HR, and that kind of leads maybe to the next piece, which is again linked around the Pay Transparency Directive. I'd love to get your thoughts on why advanced analytics is important in reporting inclusivity gaps and explaining discrepancies found while doing that reporting for the Pay Transparency Directive.
Yeah, I think the 162 pages will explain to you exactly, how to calculate the metrics, etc. But there's a story around it, because the story around it is going to make or break your executive board in these capital market days. And the only way, I believe, to do this properly is to bring in some machinery. Well, first of all, to feed a model with all kinds of data around it. So, for example, if you go to a doctor and you say, "Doctor, I have such a headache," the doctor will ask you about, David, are you sleeping well? Do you feel generally okay? How's your nutrition? Anything else happening? So the doctor is doing a 360 around you and not only talking about your head. And that is what People Analytics has to do to craft a really compelling story around the Pay Transparency Directive, around the ESG metrics and outcomes. Because some outcomes, won't be the outcomes that you like to share. Um, it's going to happen. And therefore, advanced analytics. I mean, we talked about driver analysis, for example. What are the core drivers for pay gaps? You can use driver analysis, but the thing that I'm convinced of is that the pay gap is the result of everything that is wrong in a company when it comes to diversity, inclusivity, and equity. There's no policy at a company that says certain people have to get paid more than other people. It's a result. It's a result of hiring inequity. People shout a bit more, get a bit of starting salary, shout a bit more, get higher or bigger opportunities to perform at work. Hey, if you perform better, you get higher higher performance ratings. With higher performance ratings, you get higher salary increases. Therefore, you promote faster, and blah blah blah. So you have to not only isolate anymore within the total reward space, but you have to look left and you have to look right to create a really compelling story. And that is where advanced analytics really, really comes in handy.
Let's talk about the skills-based organization. So again, this is when I go to conferences, I don't know if it's the same for you. I'd say the two topics that's on everyone's lips is AI and skills. Again, there's been talk about the skills-based organization for a few years. All the big consultancies have been talking about it. I think Deloitte most prominently. And we're seeing companies, some of the companies that I know you work with, moving more to that skills-based approach to talent, workforce planning. Like many observers in the field have been talking about this for a few years, but we're seeing many companies still struggle to adopt the skills-based approach to workforce planning. It might not be the right thing for every company, I hasten to add. I feel that many struggle to get to grips. Why do you think this is, and how can these companies overcome that?
Yeah, let's start with a positive observation, and that is that we also see a lot of companies talking about skills. And this, again, is a result of board discussions around the future of work. So it is a signal that HR is getting deeper involved in business transformations, in the future of business, etc. So it's a really good thing. And this, of course, leads to the question, what skills do we need? What skills do we have, etc.? And there are really, really cool companies. We just launched a partnership with TechPool, for example, where we can now connect their data, their fantastic taxonomy, to all the data that we collect in Crunchr, so that we can start answering questions in a heartbeat, like, what are the critical skills that we need? Are we paying for the right skills? The people that we just get on board, do they have the right skills? Are we losing the people with the critical skills? How does critical skills correlate to sales revenue? I mean, it automatically snaps, so this is fantastic. But I'm with you that inferring skills from people and from positions is still a bit difficult. I mean, these companies are making fantastic progress, but they need one critical ingredient, and that is a clean job taxonomy framework that basically organizes all the jobs into families, into bigger families. And to make this even better, you need very up-to-date job descriptions, so the LLMs can do their work. So companies, they see the value of the pilots that they do, and they're now triggered to say, like, listen, if we really want to scale this, then we have to improve our data quality extremely fast. And this is, and I also spoke about this at People Language World, there are incredibly interesting open source technologies that can help you to sanitize basically job titles. I'm a sales manager, manager sales, MGR, SLS. There are extremely elegant mathematics that you can just use, download off the shelf, that can help you to get to 70%. This is what we like to do. So yes, it's becoming important. It's the future. I truly believe it. But it also shows that this foundation is incredibly important before we can get to these bells and whistles.
Yeah, and I like the way you sort of highlight that, why is this happening? It's because boards are talking about the future of work. They're talking about business transformation, and they
Yes.
see talent people is the key, probably the key element of that. And obviously having the right people in place, the right skills in place now and in the future is basically probably going to be the make or break on whether you achieve what you're trying to achieve as an organization. So Dirk, if we were to kind of sum up
Mhm.
our conversation so far before we get to the question of the series, um, encompass everything that we've spoken about, and look into your crystal ball. Maybe next time we're having this conversation, where do you see the future of people analytics?
I hope that in, let's say, the next 2 or 3 years, HR is also part of any executive committee, just like the CFO, that the CHRO is then called the Chief People Performance and Culture, whatever. I mean, human resources, give me a break. um, the third thing is that we've realized that people analytics is a fantastic tool, but not an end goal. Same with AI. Now we talk all about Gen AI, but it will become second nature. And that we really focus on where we can move the needle within the first 12 months in frontline workers and middle management to drive transformation. That is what I wish.
Oh, that's a good wish. I think I share that with you. So that's certainly something we can talk about next time. So Dirk, if we move to the question of the series,
Yeah.
so this is a question we're asking everyone on this series. You mentioned Erin Gerbeck, who will be, I think, 2 episodes time actually. How can HR leaders use analytics to uncover and address inclusivity gap?
If you close your eyes and you picture yourself a line, basically. On the left, we talk business, and as we move to the right, we talk HR. And let's plot the employee life cycle on this line. So on the left, we have our business strategy. We translate the business strategy into people, organization, and culture requirements. Then we get to recruiting. We need to onboard them. We need to develop them. We need to pay them. We need to measure engagement, etc., etc. I believe that HR leaders can use analytics across the entire life cycle to really understand by cost center, by function, by leader, where the hot zones is where we need to do something. In this country, we have this leader that tends to promote people differently, or where people do not get the right opportunities, or where in the engagement surveys, people talk about this topic. So it's almost like what we do in Six Sigma, it's process variation. We see the end result, very high variation at the end, but we need to go back to the root cause to see where the variation accelerates and starts in the beginning. And that is for me the full view of uncovering and addressing inclusivity gaps using, connected HR insights.
Very good, Dirk. Thank you so much for joining me again on the Digital HR Leaders podcast, and thanks obviously to Crunchr for sponsoring this series of the Digital HR Leaders podcast too. So Dirk, before we part ways, could you let listeners know how they can follow you on social media and find out more about the great work you and the team are doing at Crunchr?
Of course, LinkedIn, website. We do a lot of inspiration and clarity workshops in many cities around the world. It's free. It's super cool. You can connect with people. I think last year we grew most in the US from word to mouth. So talk to other companies what they do. That's really important. And we just don't want to become the biggest people in this company, but we want to be simply the best. And I think that's also a quite nice song for my next article.
Well, you've managed to get a Tina Turner reference, an Eminem reference, and a Ted Lasso, and we talked about Ajax and Liverpool as well. So we've got a lot of cultural references in here as well, Dirk, which is fantastic. And I really look forward to seeing you. I know we bump into each other quite a lot at conferences and stuff. I think there's a people analytics world happening in October in New York, apparently. So I'm sure we'll see each other there, if not before. So thanks so much for being a guest on the show, and also for everything you do for the people analytics community.
I was about to congratulate and to thank you, David, because to whomever I speak with, they know your newsletter, they know your passion for the community, and you're the people. I mean, your team is bringing everyone together. So thanks a lot. We need more of you.
Well, that's very kind, Dirk, and
all right,
and likewise to you. there's a few of us in this space trying to push it forward. So you know, and you're definitely one of those people. So thank you very much.
In this series, we will be speaking to a range of senior leaders who are pushing a data-driven and digital HR agenda. Make sure that you subscribe via your podcast app of choice and also via our YouTube channel for free and regular interviews with the digital HR leaders of the future.